Now I'll introduce you to Sadie Sayre of Babe in the Woods Baking, our host or our sort of expert for tonight. Starting as a brunch cook in South Minneapolis, Sadie comes to the Goodacre with over 10 years of savory and pastry experience from working at restaurants such as Alma and Kalita. Passionate about the local and seasonal food movement in our area, Sadie's also driven by the desire to empower the community with the ability to use the bounty of Minnesota's 6 seasons have to offer. When she's not in the kitchen, which is a rarity as Sadie also enjoys fermentation, pickling, and preserving, Sadie loves to paint. So without further ado, I'll kick it off to you. Sadie, take it away.
Hi everyone, how's it going? Thank you, Anna, for taking care of all of the technical bits tonight. And thanks so much to Nikki, who was actually off screen, but she is my technical maven on site. And I definitely couldn't do this without her. A little bit about me. I'm the owner of Babe in the Woods, which is a new business that just started this year. I was born in Houston, but I moved to Minneapolis about a decade ago. Coming to the Twin Cities restaurant scene was maybe one of the most life-changing things that I've ever done, and I feel really grateful to have had so many experiences there. I started working at the Goodacre last year, helping run their cooking class program, and I've always been really interested in inventive flavor combos that help people kind of rethink classics that might just be a little overlooked or not get their due as well as I think that they should. I'm hugely passionate about Skillshare, mutual aid networks, the local seasonal Midwest, and how we might better serve our communities, spread joy with those that we love regardless of distance. So here I am, and hopefully you'll take some of these skills into the holidays with you and use them to share love, and that would be the best possible thing. We're gonna start tonight with 2 recipes. We're gonna do cornmeal thumbprints with jam. I'll be using a homemade apricot coriander, but really you can use whatever. And then we're also going to be making a pretty classic double chocolate crinkle cookie. The thumbprint cookie will be utilizing gluten-free flour. My preference, as I step off screen a little bit, is Bob's Red Mill. It's a blue bag. It's a 1-to-1 cup flour. Basically, it makes it different from all-purpose because it's actually a blend of starches and gluten-free flours, brown rice flour, potato starch, things like that. Because of that, you're going to attack it with a lower cooking temperature for longer, so those starches can gelatinize, as opposed to flour, which can kind of take a little bit of a higher temperature as that gluten starts to react. For the thumbprints, you'll need a stand mixer, but the miso cookies can be mixed in a bowl. That usually makes it a really good recipe for family night. But I do find that both of them are really accessible and they hold up to a lot of changes. Good question. If you don't have the 1-to-1 flour, you can absolutely use all-purpose ostensibly. This recipe has been formulated for gluten-free flour, so it's absolutely at your own experimentation. Yeah, totally, it should work pretty well. Tonight I have my mise en place ready, and I find that just kind of getting all of your stuff organized before you get started is a great way to minimize dishes and clutter and chaos in the kitchen that kind of inevitably happens. I've tempered my butter and eggs. If you happen to not do that, you can run your eggs under warm, not hot water, and you can cut your butter into really small cubes. And then that'll just kind of like bring the temperature of it up a little bit more naturally. We'll be whisking and sifting our dries beforehand. That'll just kind of break up the leavening and then any kind of clumpy chunks of flour or starch that might occur. And then, as Anna mentioned, I actually sent my recipe out and it's in all grams. I am addicted to using grams in the kitchen. I feel like it's super, super consistent. It's so easy to scale a recipe up or down if you happen to want to make more of something, if you want to make less of something. It really handles it super well. And then my other number one thing that I love to use in the kitchen are scoops. And for cookies, they're like the best. They're so consistent and it makes it just like a breeze to scoop cookies. Yeah. If anyone has any questions.
So far, so good, I think.
Cool. Then we can get right into the thumbprints. If you want to switch cams.
Sure.
We'll be doing these with a stand mixer with paddle attachment. The thumbprints are a basic gluten-free shortbread with the addition of cornmeal for a little textural crunch. That they get pressed with an indentation for jam. Pretty much any jam works great, and you can experiment with fruit and jam combos. Where's the thing? Oh, it goes down. It's my first day, sorry. So for this, we will be starting with 163 grams of butter. Typically, when I make this recipe for Babe in the Woods, I actually steep the butter with a little bit of calendula. It just kind of adds like a nice floral flavor. But I do find that you can brown butter. There's a lot of other things that you can steep butter with if you're interested in getting some flavors out there. And then I actually also add about 30 grams of vegetable oil. Should I be doing it like this? Perfect.
That's it.
All right. Because gluten-free flour is made with starch instead of flour, it basically requires a little bit more fat without that spread that butter causes. So I do add a small amount of canola. You can use coconut, olive oil, whatever you prefer. And you can experiment with substituting oil for more of the butter if you happen to not want as much spread as this cookie is normally going to give you. So we're going to start.
Sadie, could I interrupt you with a quick question?
Yeah.
Someone was wondering, what is steeping butter?
It is bringing butter up to heat on the stove so that everything melts. And then you can add other flavors to it. I'll steep butter with coffee. You can steep it with tea, freeze-dried fruit. There's kind of the whole world is at your fingertips with what you do with butter.
Cool.
Really cool.
So it's like making tea, but with butter instead of water.
Exactly. So, oh wait, maybe we should switch away. Switch away. So I'm gonna get these creaming, but while we do that, I'm actually going to combine all of my dry ingredients. Can you guys still hear me? Yes. Okay. So okay, cool. I'm gonna start by combining all of my dry ingredients. This is gonna be my gluten-free flour. This is gonna be my cornmeal. And then my baking powder and my salt. And I'm gonna get these all combined, and I'm gonna use a slightly larger. Is there a larger colander? Or like a strainer up top? Down, perfect. Great. So you're just gonna start by sifting these. I like to sift actually on a parchment paper. And then it's gonna break up all those really big chunks. You can dump that back out. You'll totally want that texture. So just get that right back in there. And then once it's ready, just pop it back in the bowl. Okay, now we can go back to our mixer. So, perfect. So I've got my butter and my oil in there, and I'm gonna add a certain amount. I'm going to add 50 grams of granulated sugar, and then I'm gonna add 75 grams of light brown sugar. Then at this point, you can start creaming it at kind of a high speed. Medium high usually works. You're basically just looking for the butter to lighten in color about a shade or two. That's looking great. Oh yeah, that's totally the magic. All so I'm going to take it off and then show you guys. So, there we go. So as you can see, my butter has actually started to lighten up a little bit. You can absolutely see that there is aeration occurring where we're whipping air into that sugar and butter. That sugar is going to add friction so that that butter can get whipped up higher. You know what? This is actually a good time to stop, and we're going to add vanilla paste. The vanilla paste is actually my favorite. I know that people typically use vanilla extract or vanilla bean, but vanilla paste is a suspension of vanilla in corn syrup, and it actually works to really disperse all of that super good flavor. And so then we're also going to add about 3 grams of zest, which is about the zest of half of a lemon. And then we're also going to peel some fresh ginger.
And you're just doing that with a spoon, Sadie?
I am, yeah. It's super easy. You just kind of use the spoon to work away. And then you can also use it to like kind of get in all those little gingery crevices. You know, ginger is super knobby, especially right now. If you happen to not want to use fresh ginger, which no one will fault you for, you can absolutely use dry ginger powder. It works super well. I definitely find that when I'm using dried as opposed to fresh, you really want to take that down to maybe about 1/3 of the typical quantity. And so it's really only about, I want to say it ends up being maybe 1/4 of a teaspoon of ginger powder. So just some ways that you can kind of play around with this recipe as you work with it. All right. So then we're just going to kind of give this a scrape. We're going to let this aerate a little bit more before we add our flour.
2 more ingredient questions for Sadie, if that's all right.
Yeah, what's up?
One is, does vanilla paste convert to vanilla extract in the same quantities? Could you use extract here?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. And then the other one, how about freeze-dried ginger instead of powdered or fresh?
Ooh, I have never used freeze-dried ginger. I would say if you're feeling adventurous, you should totally give it a shot and then tell me how it goes.
Awesome.
But I mean, I think that the world of cookies is like pretty forgiving, right? Like,
yeah.
If you happen to have to make a substitution for a minor ingredient on the fly, it's usually going to work out all right. So I've scraped my bowl here. You can see that I've scraped all the way to the bottom. Unmixed stuff loves to hide out on the bottom of the bowl. It's my curse. All right. So we're just going to get this mixing a little bit more. And yeah. While that's happening, I can kind of talk about the cookies themselves. We're going to preheat our oven to 300 degrees. Too high of a temperature is going to melt that cookie to too much of a spread. And so I typically find that this recipe works a lot better if you bake it at a lower temp for a little bit longer. I can show you how to reform them as you get them out of the oven. And yeah. Typically this cookie I like to freeze all the way before I bake them. I find that that also kind of helps with that spread issue. So this will be a cookie that if you're baking along at home, you might want to toss in the freezer and then you can bake afterwards, but I can absolutely show you all the tips and tricks. So we can switch to here. Mm-hmm. We're gonna take it back to the bowl here, back to bowl cam. Love it. So yeah, we're doing bowl cam and we are currently at a spot where this is looking really good. Everything is really nice and fluffy. Everything is super happy together. And so then I'm just gonna give that a really good scrape. Typically, if this was an egg-based cookie, this is where I would give this a scrape and then add my eggs on low. I will be showing you kind of a little bit more about that method when we get to the miso cookies, but if you happen to be doing cookies in a stand mixer, this is about when I would add that. All right, so really can't let all that butter go to waste, you know? I'm gonna add my dries now. These are the dries that I sifted at the beginning of the recipe. And then once we get here, we're just going to mix this on low. And we're gonna do this until it's just combined. We're gonna mix it on slightly higher than low. This looks great.
Wish this had smell-o-vision.
Nikki says that it smells awesome in here, and she's super psyched because she'll be taking these cookies home with her as a gigantic thank you. So this is looking pretty good. I've got some unincorporated dries here, but I will say that I find every single cookie recipe, whether it's gluten-free, vegan, or just a standard baking recipe, pretty much all of these recipes work way better if your dries are a little bit less incorporated as opposed to over.
Like shaggy.
That is shaggy. And this is also kind of what you can come to expect with a gluten-free dough. If this was an all-purpose flour recipe, I probably wouldn't have mixed it that long. Really, I would have just combined it until it all came together. But because this gluten-free recipe is more of a starch, kind of weird, but we're just gonna go with it. And this is what it looks like when it's happy. And then we can start scooping and eventually filling. Should I swap? Okay. All right. So here I am with my trusty, oh, actually Nikki's shown all of my tools of the trade here. Here I am with my trusty gram scale. I use this for baking powder, soda, salt, other leavenings. Here is gonna be, here is gonna be my ring mold. I actually use this to give the cookies some shape if they happen to just kind of like melt out a bit too much. This is like kind of a magic baker tool where you can use it to save your life if you screwed up just a little tiny bit and not a ton. And so then here I am, I've got my purple scoop, my miracle purple scoop. So you're just going to tamp this down with your finger, and then you can kind of use your finger to scrape some of that extra off the edges. And then there you go. And then as you hold it like this, you can dip your thumb right into the center of it and just kind of use it to form this cookie. This cookie will absolutely take like a pretty good beating before you bake it. It's kind of nice. All right. All right, and so then these are pretty much ready to go in the freezer. I have actually found that you can fill them before you freeze them or after them. It's completely up to you. Just for the sake of Giada-esque baking, I will do a couple more. I'll do a couple more, and then I'll show you guys how to fill them. We'll throw them in the oven, and then they'll come out miraculously finished. This is something that I always wanted to do, so I'm really excited that you guys are going to be here with me for it.
How many cookies will this yield?
This will yield about, if you happen to use a scoop like this, it'll probably get you close to 18. So again, this is where like scaling recipes works really well because you can adjust it if you happen to want a little bit more or a little bit less. Then it's just a matter of basically percentage math, which isn't the most fun unless you're a baker, but still a necessary evil nonetheless. All right, and so now I've got my apricot coriander jam, and I'm just gonna take actually way less of that. Sorry, I got really enthused about jam.
Can I ask you another quick question, Sadie?
Yeah, what's up?
If someone were to use all-purpose flour, would you suggest at least at first trying the same amount?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Bob's Red Mill is like a 1-to-1 sub, so it should work really well.
Great. And then you would still use oil if you were using all-purpose?
That is actually probably the one thing that I would omit.
Okay.
Yeah, I would probably leave that out at first. You can always add it later if you happen to notice that the dough is a little stiff. But I think that the butter and all-purpose flour version of the recipe will prove that it probably doesn't need that oil.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are just about ready to go in the oven. And yeah, I don't go too crazy. Hopefully you guys can see that. And yeah, so from there, we'll just take a second and throw these in the oven. And then we'll just wait, and about 15 minutes later, this would have been really funny, but they were still hot. 15 minutes later, they're gonna come out looking like this. I find from here, do you want to switch it back down? I find from here that if they're maybe looking like a little lumpy or like a little too spread, you can pretty much take this ring mold and just kind of use it to circle the cookies, and then that'll actually tighten them back up. The only thing that I've found is that because this is a starch, you're gonna want these cookies to set completely on this baking sheet before you attempt to lift them off. Otherwise, they will crumble and it will be a little heartbreaking. Pretty much you'll bake them until the centers are brown or the bottom is brown and set. And then you can actually feel it on the edges that they get to be a little bit crisp. Yeah. So there they are.
Thumbprints. Beautiful.
All right. So, you could so from here, we're actually going to head right into the miso crinkle cookie. I love this cookie. It's just like a one bowl wonder. It's super easy.
One more question for you, Sadie, before you start putting stuff in that bowl. Someone was wondering what size scoop that was you were using for the thumbprints.
It's a purple scoop. It's about 3/4 of an ounce.
Okay.
So you can probably use about a tablespoon and it'll probably be like equivalent.
Okay, great. Does purple correspond to like a number of scoops? Someone mentioned that there's sometimes like 30, 40.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. 40?
Yes. Yeah, the 40 scoop is really where the magic is at on that thumbprint cookie. So from here, we're gonna move to the miso crinkle. It's just like my one bowl wonder cookie. It's so easy. It's double chocolate, really cakey. It's super, super rich. So if you know any chocolate fiends and you wanna do something really nice for them, this is the easiest thing that you can do. Typically for Babe in the Woods, I press a house-made miso caramel into the center, and you can absolutely fill them with caramel, cream cheese, almond or peanut butter cups. You really, like, the world is your oyster with these cookies. For these, you'll actually be preheating the oven to 350. And we're once again going to start by sifting all of our dries together. Especially once you get into the habit of working with cocoa powder, you're absolutely going to want to get your dries mixed and sifted. So this is going to be, it's going to be 105 grams of all-purpose flour. It's going to be 3 grams of salt, 4 grams of baking powder, which I want to say is the equivalent to about half a teaspoon. And then 3 grams of espresso powder. From there, we're going to do 46 grams of cocoa powder. I don't think that I use anything super fancy, but whatever feels good, whatever you've got around. This recipe is super reliable for a lot of different things. Oh yeah, you can totally see that. So you can pretty much already, if you want to scroll down, you can pretty much already see that there's like gigantic chunks of cocoa powder in here, and they're just begging to be broken up. This is also the best way to get all of this mix completely incorporated together, which is going to really help keep things even and nice. I'm using kosher salt, which is large flake, which is why you can see it in the bottom of the sifter. Right. And so then once your dries are incorporated together, you're actually going to, your station. You're going to, sorry, you're going to take them and get them back into a large bowl. And then you're just going to set that aside for now. For this recipe, you're going to use 70 grams of bittersweet chocolate. You have a lot of options with this. I am actually going to use this gigantic chunk of Calavo chocolate, which I love. It's a 60% dark, and you can actually just chop the edges, and then it flakes apart so nicely. And it really makes this cookie a dream to come together. You can absolutely just use whatever kind of chips you have hanging around that you're really into. Please don't feel like you have to use this.
Sadie, where do you buy your espresso powder? Or do you powder espresso beans at your house?
Ooh, I don't. That would be, wow. Anna's giving me a lot of credit here, which I love. This is actually the espresso powder that I use. I want to say, oh, here, yes, we did it. Sorry that my hands are all chocolatey. I want to say that you can get this at Target, which is, you know, but you can also experiment with other types of espresso powder if that coffee flavor is something that's going to be really important to you. In the cookie itself, there's really only enough espresso powder to really bring out the chocolatiness of this chocolate. So if you want to kind of amp the coffee flavor up, I would absolutely kind of experiment on your own with different varieties of maybe coffee beans that you grind yourself really, really finely, or anything like that.
How about that giant hunk of chocolate? Where'd that come from?
It came from a specialty grocery store. You can probably find usually if there's like a small store in your area, like Serdix or even like ones in Byerly's, they typically have like kind of more high-end chocolate, and you can go from there. if you must, you can also go to Whole Foods. I know they have it there. So we've got about 70 grams of very finely chopped chocolate here. And we are actually going to take about a tablespoon of our dry ingredients, and we're gonna just toss that into the chocolate here. We're gonna give that a little stir. This is going to help evenly incorporate these dries into our final mix. And then it's also going to keep us from over mixing our all-purpose flour once we get to that final stage. The death of cookies is mixing until a glutinous reaction forms. So you really just want everything just mixed. We might need another bowl. Do you want to hand me a medium-sized bowl? All right, thank you. So from here, we're going to add, I'll bring all my little things over. From here, we're going to mix 45 grams of vegetable oil. I actually do a vegetable oil based crinkle as opposed to a butter based crinkle because I want cakiness and I don't want a lot of spread. Butter does tend to be a little bit drying, which is sort of a weird misnomer, but totally something that happens. I'm going to add 30 grams of light brown sugar. Exactly. But yeah, Great British Bake Off tells you all about the butter. I'm going to add 55 grams of granulated sugar, and then we're just going to give that a stir and actually just let that sit for a minute. It seems incongruous there for a second, but the sugar is going to melt a little bit, and it's actually going to provide some wetness for the final stage. And so while that's waiting, we're actually going to separate some eggs. For this recipe, you'll need 1 egg and 1 egg yolk. And I actually find that the yolk adds a lot of cakiness as well. It kind of it continually acts as that binder while still being delicious and fatty and kind of everything you want, as opposed to that white, which is just going to bind and then add water, which is going to get baked out. So I'm cracking 1 egg. And then for my second egg, where I just want the yolk, I'm going to get a little bowl that actually already has some whites in it. And then I'm just going to do this. And you just kind of dance it from one to the other. And then you're ready to go. I'm going to give you a whisk. We'll whisk this up a little bit into our, thank you. We'll whisk this up a little bit before it goes into our fat and sugar mixture. Typically you can absolutely do all of this in one bowl, but just for the sake of showing you guys everything, I thought that I would get it all separated. So then you'll give this a mix. And then once that's all incorporated, you're just going to add your dry ingredients. And then stir that all together. It seems like it doesn't want to come together, but it absolutely does. If you feel like this is kind of struggling to work at home, you can feel free to add maybe like another teaspoon of vegetable oil, but I've never found that I needed it. This might be the time though. Yeah. So we're just going to throw in just a teeny tiny bit of oil. Basically, you don't want to add too much extra oil to this because it will make it so that the powdered sugar gets kind of like cakey and wet. So it's always better to go a little bit under than a little bit over. And so then our final step is that we're going to add our chocolate with a little bit more dry ice to it. Give that all a good stir. Yeah, you know, it's really for the best that you use a recipe as a substitution or as a guideline and not necessarily like to the exact. Sometimes your sugar may be different. Sometimes your sugar may be more fine than what you end up working with afterwards. So, crazy. So yeah, this is looking pretty good. This should make about 12 cookies. And for this one, we're actually going to grab a black scoop. And if I was going to add anything to the center, this is the point where I would actually dip my finger in and then add, like, say, maybe if you want to add some more chocolate chips, then you can add them right to the center, just like that. And then you'll just use your thumb to cover that bottom right there.
Someone asked about a silpat versus parchment.
Someone's asking about parchment paper versus silpat. I actually prefer parchment paper when I'm baking large quantities of things. I do find questions, really good questions. I find that using a silpat definitely works to conduct heat better. So if that's something that you're used to, you absolutely can. But for these recipes, I just use parchment. I don't use spray on it. And I find that it works really well. Someone was asking about the difference between light brown sugar and dark brown sugar. Dark brown sugar is actually just going to have a higher molasses content to it. So it's going to be a stickier and sweeter sugar. It's going to have more of that like deep funk of like coconut sugar, muscovado, or anything that you might be used to working with. The crinkle cookie does not spread a ton when it's in the oven, as it is an oil-based cookie. And so I do find that it's the best to smush them down a little bit, just kind of get them started.
Sadie, is that black scoop larger or smaller than the purple one?
It's slightly larger, it's a 30.
Got it.
And so if you were going to mimic that at home, it would probably be about 2 tablespoons. And so then as I have these pretty much ready to go in the oven, I've got 2 final steps. My first step, this cookie I typically bake from room temperature. I find that that is going to help that spread quite a bit, and it's going to kind of add to the delicious super richness of it. If you happen to want to make these the night before and then bake them the next morning, you'll want to just let them out to temper before you get started. I like to toss them in granulated sugar before I toss them in powdered. And then that just kind of helps keep all of that delicious chocolate inside the cookie where it needs to stay. If I was really feeling pro about this, I would do one hand with granulated and one hand with powdered, but it's unplugged today. We're just doing chill. Are there any other questions while I...
Let's see, there was one a little while ago about if someone's using a hand mixer, would you recommend regular beaters or the dough hook attachment?
Oh, I would use regular beaters.
Great.
Yep, that's going to be your magic ticket there.
Yeah. And then I think a lot of people are just curious kind of about substitution. So any wisdom you have to share. Someone asked about using lime zest instead of lemon in that Thumbprint recipe.
So good. You should totally do that. I have always had this dream for that cookie that I could definitely do more with it than I currently even am. I dream about doing raspberry jam with lime zest. I dream about doing orange zest with plum butter. You could do even like toasted coconut with dulce de leche, or you could do chocolate and shredded candy canes. Like there's just a million things that you could do with that cookie.
Awesome.
This one would be great if you wanted to happen to add chopped nuts or dried fruit. It really, honestly, it's super versatile.
Oh, and then someone asked about making this one gluten-free.
Good question.
Possible? Yeah.
Again, with the 1-to-1 cup flour, I feel like you could certainly give it a shot. I would absolutely, again, tier on the possibility of doing it at a lower temperature for longer, as opposed to baking it at 350 for between 8 to 10 minutes, which is what we're going to do with this one. You would probably want to check it probably about 10 minutes in, and then see if the edges are set and feeling crispy. So from here, we're going to just pop this in the oven. Oh, secret. And then about 8 to 10 minutes later, you have this, and this looks so good. And everyone's gonna love it. It's gonna be a huge hit at holiday parties. You can pretty much, yeah, you can see this beautiful crinkle from here. I actually will move this over. Pretty much my tell for all cookies is gonna be feeling set around the edges. And so once you get to that point where there's like a little bit of browning happening there, you're pretty much good to go. Yeah, these ship super great. They travel really well to friends and family if you happen to have people in your bubble. But yeah.
Someone asked if you would ever use coconut oil for this recipe, Sadie.
I absolutely would and have, and it works super well.
Awesome. And I think just people are curious in general. Sadie and I were laughing the other day because I was saying once I tried to use turbinado sugar instead of brown sugar, and Sadie laughed with me because I had already learned the lesson that did not work. But just kind of, do you have any sources you go to when you're wondering about substituting, or how do you know what'll work and what won't?
The internet is my best friend when it comes to pretty much any kind of substitutions. I would absolutely say that, you know, part of the really great spot about alternative diets and substitutions and where we're at now is that you can pretty much Google to see if something is going to 1-to-1 swap or what that looks like. I know, especially with some work that I've been doing, again, for the Good Acre, but for the vocational training program, we were talking about stevia, swerve, and non-sugar sugar substitutes. And one of the things that we found is that you're going to want to bulk that volume up with something. And so there's really a lot of stuff to consider that I don't even think that I would have given the full breadth of interest, although I do try to be pretty amenable to alternative diets when I do stuff for Babe in the Woods. I did see that someone was asking if you melt the coconut oil, and you definitely melt it, but don't add it hot. And so you could maybe melt it, mix it with the sugar, and then let it sit till it comes back down to room temp. But then just make sure that it's not hot by the time you add your eggs.
Awesome. I'll ask a question, Sadie, because I'm curious, and if you don't have an answer, that's okay.
Sure.
But do you have any memories of times when you tried a substitution or tried something and it totally didn't work?
I feel like my whole baking is made of times when I tried to substitute things and it didn't work. Being open and forgiving to what is happening in your kitchen as you're baking is like the best thing that you can ever do for baking. I think that there's possibly one-to-one substitutions or other substitutions that I could do for stuff all day. But really, if you have the heart of an experimenter and you're willing to accept whatever goes wrong, I totally recommend just giving it a shot and seeing how it goes.
That's such a good answer. All right. So someone just sent a question. Claire says, my chocolate cookies are super liquidy. We used olive oil though. Do different oils make a difference?
I think that I would say that different oils do make a difference, but I would actually wonder a little bit more about maybe what type of sugar you're using. If you're using a very finely granulated sugar, then that's actually going to affect how it seeps into the oil and sort of like melts from there.
Okay. Mary asks, do you have a favorite cutout sugar cookie recipe? I'm guessing for maybe that perhaps could be decorated.
Yeah, I actually do. I want to say that one of my favorite, it's very tedious, but it's totally worth it. My favorite cutout sugar cookie recipe is actually any pâte sucrée. It's going to be a tart dough, but it's so buttery and so rich, and it's really just heaven on earth. And I find that you can freeze them and bake them as you would a sugar cookie, and then you can also frost them from there.
Maybe we can send out, if there's like a generic recipe on the internet, we can send that with our follow-up email.
Absolutely, I would love to find them.
Yeah, Lauren asked, would you type that out? And I can't say that I know how, so we'll send it in an email.
Awesome.
Rave reviews of the Thumbprint cookies.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I absolutely, so freezing is going to be part of where that's really pertinent, because otherwise those cookies do really want to spread. And then making sure, I actually have this super fancy ring mold cookie cutter deal, but you can totally use like the bottom of a cup. You can use a mason jar lid. There's like a ton of stuff that you can use to kind of round those cookies back up. The Thumbprint, the jam should go on the Thumbprint before baking.
Awesome. All right. A lot of people just having a good time. And
this is so cool. I wasn't sure if people would have time to bake along, and
yeah,
I feel like I really zipped through everything, and I'm proud of you guys for sticking with it. So.
Yeah, and as a reminder to everyone, we will send a recording of this out probably tomorrow in an email. So if you want to follow along at a different time and be able to pause and restart at your own pace, you'll be able to do that. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. If I'm missing any, please send them in the chat right now. Just lots of thanks, and this was great. And people seem to learn a lot. I'll remind folks that Babe in the Woods Baking is Sadie's business, and you can either Google it or it's just babeinthewoodsbaking.com, right, Sadie?
Yes, babeinthewoodsbaking.com. If this was a lot of fun, but not something that you're really interested in ever creating again, which is totally understandable, yeah, feel free to hit me up. I ship nationwide. I do local pickup and delivery in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So I would be honored to bake for any of you all. This would be fantastic.
Awesome. And those of you who bought a coupon to Babe in the Woods Baking with your registration should have received an email from Sadie. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did send that email out on Monday.
Cool.
If you didn't get it, just feel free to email me, babeinthewoodsbaking@gmail.com. And yeah, I super look forward to baking for you all.
Excellent. Maybe the last thing you can do for us, Sadie, is show us that Bob's Red Mill flour package again. Someone request seeing that. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We're kind of wrapping up, so feel free to sign off. Nice to see some of your faces and have all of you here. So thanks so much for coming.
Thanks so much. It was so good to see everyone.
Right.
Hi, Anna.
Hey, Karin. I saw you sign on.
There's Hannah.
Hi, Hannah. How's holiday gift box pickup?
Almost done. There's 10 more people who need to pick up. Some of who told me they'd pick up tomorrow. So.
Oh, okay, great.
We are gonna go snag some cookies from Sadie.
Oh, lucky. I wish I were there. I'm in the wrong kitchen.
Yeah. You look very nice today.
Thank you.
Earrings. I think I've seen those ones.
Yeah, relatively new.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll leave you alone.
Thanks for doing pickup. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.